Tortoise was hungry. It was mid-afternoon when he popped his head out of his shell and squinted at the fierce midday sun. Goodness, he thought as he listened to his stomach rumble, what wouldn't I do for a nice delicious lunch? Tortoise looked up and saw Ibis, the bird, land on her nest, high up in the branches of an iroko tree. She bent over her hungry children and began to feed them with a fat, juicy worm. Tortoise then noticed that Spider had spun his web on a bush just ahead of him. The fly that was to be Spider's lunch wriggled helplessly in its sticky prison. Tortoise watched fascinated as Spider crawled towards his prey with slow, deliberate movements. Spider's long forearms stretched out towards the fly and yanked it loose. Tortoise continued to watch as Spider began to eat his lunch. Tortoise now felt hungrier than ever. He picked himself up and went to look for someone who would give him something to eat. Soon he arrived at a market called Ekiyojioso. This was a new market that had been opened recently. It was a place where all the animals could bring their crops to sell. Now Tortoise was very lazy. All through the sowing season, when the other animals had worked hard planting crops, Tortoise had not bothered to tend his farm. As a result, when the time came to harvest the crops, Tortoise had nothing, because he had planted nothing. Tortoise stood at the entrance to the market and looked around. A smile came over his face as he took in the delicious foods that were displayed for sale. There were masses of large, juicy fruit, piled high in baskets. There were huge mountains of cassava, beans, millet, and maize. In fact, there was so much food that Tortoise's mouth began to water. He could see antelope sitting by a fire, frying some akara bowls. They gave off the most delicious aroma. "Ah, my friend Antelope, I see you are well," Tortoise said as he sauntered up cheerfully. Antelope knew how lazy and greedy Tortoise was. He nodded a silent greeting and used his ladle to turn over the akara bowls, which were now a golden brown. Tortoise stared at the food hungrily. Finally Antelope asked, "Would you like to buy some of my akara balls?" Tortoise sighed heavily. "I would, Antelope, I would indeed, but I have no money. My crops did not ripen this year, and I don't know how I will feed myself or my family." Antelope had heard this story several times before. "I'm sorry, Tortoise," he said, though he did not feel in the least bit sorry for Tortoise, "but I can't help you. I need all the money I can get from the sale of my akara balls to buy food for my family." Tortoise nodded sadly and moved off to the next stall. Goat was peeling the skins off cobs of maize before putting them on a grill to roast. The cobs were large and yellow. They looked extremely appetizing. "Ah, my good friend Goat, how are you today?" Tortoise asked. Goat looked up above the tops of his steel-rimmed glasses. "Thank you for asking, Tortoise. I am well," he replied in his thick, guttural voice. "Then we must praise God," Tortoise replied, staring at the roasting cobs. "We cannot take good health for granted." He shook his head sadly and waited for Goat to inquire after his health. When Goat failed to respond, Tortoise added, "You know I've been ill, terribly ill. It's only God that said I should live, otherwise." Tortoise shook his head again. "I'm sorry to hear that," Goat replied shortly, but he was in no mood to be conned out of his produce, so he waited for Tortoise to ask for what he knew he had come for. Then he shook his head stubbornly. "My friend, you must learn to work as we all do. If you want some maize, you have to pay for it, like everybody else." And so Tortoise left. He approached Hare and even grumpy old Owl, but the answers were all the same. No one was willing to give him anything for nothing. Tortoise went back into the forest, disappointed and hungry. What a selfish bunch, he thought angrily. His mind was working overtime as he planned a way of getting even. A few days later, Tortoise had decided on a plan. It was such a good plan, he thought, that he congratulated himself and would have given himself a pat on the back had his short hands been able to reach. Tortoise knew that there were several entrances to the market. He carved an image of leopard which he placed at one entrance behind a carefully arranged clump of grass. Next, Tortoise went to another corner of the market and, disguising his voice, began to sing, Everyone was alarmed when they heard the song. The one creature animals and humans alike were afraid of was leopard. A little boy screamed. He pointed to the leopard he could see at the entrance to the market. People looked. They could clearly see a leopard's face parting the bush. In a panic, everyone ran away in the opposite direction, instantly forgetting their wares. Within minutes, the market was deserted. Tortoise waited. When he was sure that there was no one around, he came out of his hiding place and began to stuff food in his bag. Tortoise was greedy, and he stuffed so much food in the bag that he could barely carry it. Half dragging and half carrying the bag, he made his way to a safe place in the forest. There, Tortoise made himself comfortable on a heap of dried leaves and began to stuff himself. He ate so much that he could not move afterwards, so he simply burped a few times and fell asleep, satisfied and happy. The next day, Tortoise played his trick again. The stall owners heard the song warning of leopard's approach, and they all ran, leaving their stalls unattended. The animals eventually returned to find their products ransacked as before. Quite understandably, they were upset. How long was this going to go on, they wondered. A meeting of all the market sellers was called, and they debated what to do. Suddenly, Dog came rushing into the meeting. He told all the animals to follow him, and he took them to the entrance of the market. The animals were curious. What was it Dog wanted to show them, they wondered. They soon found out. From its hiding place behind the bushes, Dog pulled out the carved leopard. "This is what we have been running from," he said. The other animals looked at the leopard in amazement. From close up, the carving was so crude that it could not fool anybody, but from a distance it resembled the real thing and had fooled them all. "Who could have pulled such a nasty trick?" asked Peacock. "Who indeed?" Dog rubbed his head. "We shall soon find out," Goat stated confidently. All eyes turned to him. "You see, I have a plan," Goat continued. The next day, Tortoise arrived at the market to play his trick once more. He found his carved leopard where he had left it the previous day. Suspecting nothing untoward, he put it in position so that the animals would see its head parting the bushes. He then went to a corner of the market and started to sing, telling the animals that the leopard was approaching. Everyone ran away as they had done before. Soon the market was deserted, and Tortoise came out of his hiding place. Tortoise had grown in confidence and arrogance these past few days. What a bunch of stupid animals, he thought as he began to fill his bag with food. Suddenly, from the corner of his eye, Tortoise saw a young boy kneeling at a stall. Angrily, he went up to the boy. He stood before him for a moment, but the boy just stared back. This made Tortoise angry. "Won't you run?" Tortoise said, and lashing out, he tried to push the boy. To Tortoise's increasing annoyance, he found that his hand was stuck. To try and free it, Tortoise put his other hand on the boy and pulled. To his dismay, his other hand was also stuck. Tortoise, realizing he was stuck, started yelling, "Let me go! Let me go!" Tortoise suddenly realized that the boy had not moved once. He had continued to kneel there, in exactly the same position, with the same expression on his face. Tortoise looked closer and realized what he should have guessed all along. The boy was simply a painted wood carving, covered with an awful, gooey, fast-drying glue. But this realization came too late. Tortoise was stuck. Eventually, the animals came out of hiding. They saw Tortoise stuck to the wood carving, his half-full bag of food lying on the ground beside him. The animals knew that they had caught their culprit. They decided not to punish Tortoise too harshly, but they did want him to understand the consequences of his actions. The animals helped Tortoise get unstuck and gathered around him. Goat, being the wisest of them all, spoke gently. "Tortoise, we understand that you were hungry, but tricking us was not the right way to get food. We all work hard for what we have. You need to learn to work hard too, and you will always have enough to eat." Tortoise hung his head in shame. "I'm sorry, everyone. I realize now that my laziness and trickery were wrong. I promise to work hard and be honest from now on." From that day forward, Tortoise kept his promise. He worked diligently alongside the other animals, planting and harvesting his crops. He never went hungry again and earned back the trust and friendship of the other animals. The lessons Tortoise learned were valuable. Honesty and hard work always pay off, and it's never right to take what isn't yours. And so Tortoise lived happily, always remembering the importance of being fair and kind. And the animals of Ekyojoso Market lived in peace and harmony, always ready to help each other, knowing that together they could overcome any challenge.